The morning I lost access to my own bank account. My husband texted me, "You don't need to worry about the finances anymore. I've handled it." It was 6. Sure, M. In Seattle. The sky still gray and undecided. When I opened my laptop at the kitchen island and typed in the password I had used for years, the system rejected it. I tried again. Rejected. A third time. Slower. Careful with each character. Still nothing. When I attempted the password reset, the recovery email wasn't mine. It was his. I remember staring at the screen longer than I should have, as if the dashboard might reappear out of pity. 12 years of shared accounts. Mortgage payments. Retirement contributions. Investment portfolios I had personally optimized. All gone with one error message. At 6:14 a dot. My phone buzzed. "You don't need to worry about the finances anymore. I've handled it." Handled it? That was the word that told me this wasn't a glitch. That was the word that told me my husband thought he had pressed delete on my life. My name is Lauren Mitchell. I was 35 years old, and I made a living as a business consultant specializing in financial restructuring. I built systems for struggling companies. I found inefficiencies, sealed leaks, prevented collapses. I taught CEOs how to read patterns before they turned into disasters. And somehow, I had missed the pattern forming inside my own marriage. Ryan was 38, a product manager at a fast-growing tech company in Bellevue. On paper, we were the kind of couple people described as stable. Dual incomes, clean credit, a tidy house in a quiet suburb east of Seattle. No kids yet, but plenty of plans. Over the past few months, though, something had shifted. He started using phrases like strategic separation when talking about money. He insisted on migrating our joint accounts to a new digital banking platform because it was more efficient. He volunteered to manage quarterly investment reviews himself, something we used to do together at the dining table with spreadsheets and wine. I told myself it was harmless. He was detail-oriented, ambitious, focused. Now, staring at the blank login screen, I felt something colder than panic. I felt calculation. I checked the joint credit card app next. Logged out. Password changed. The brokerage account. Same result. Our shared cloud folder labeled financial planning had been emptied. Not archived. Emptied. I opened my email and typed Ryan's name into the search bar. 6 months ago. He had registered a new LLC. I remembered the conversation vaguely, something about exploring a side consulting idea. I hadn't thought much of it. We were both entrepreneurial. Now I noticed something else. Several automated transfer notifications I had overlooked. Small enough at first not to raise alarm. 5,000. 8,000. 12,000. Labeled as development expenses. My phone buzzed again. Seriously? Lauren. Don't make this dramatic. I'm optimizing things for our future. Our future. I walked into the bedroom. His side of the closet was half empty. The navy carry-on suitcase he used for conferences was gone. His laptop charger missing from the desk. "Where are you?" I texted. "Early meeting. Product emergency." I stood there holding my phone, replaying the last few weeks in my mind. The late-night Slack pings. The sudden gym memberships. The way he angled his screen away from me at dinner. 3 hours later, another message arrived. This one from an unknown number. It was a photo. Ryan sitting at a restaurant I recognized in downtown Bellevue. Across from him, leaning forward with her hand over his, was Alexis Carter, 29, sales representative at his company. I had met her once at a holiday party. Bright smile. Too attentive. The caption read, "You deserve to know." Before I could process it, Ryan texted again. "Look, I didn't want you finding out like this, but things have changed. We both know this hasn't been working. Hasn't been working." I glanced back at my laptop screen. Access denied. Access denied. Access denied. The betrayal was sharp. But it wasn't the deepest cut. The deepest cut was the assumption he thought I wouldn't look deeper. He thought deleting visibility meant deleting power. He didn't know that years ago, as part of a client's crisis management overhaul, I had developed a habit: automatic encrypted backups of all shared financial data routed through a separate cloud storage account in my name. It was a professional reflex. Never trust a single point of access. I had almost forgotten about it. Almost. I opened a different browser, logged into my private storage, and watched as the folder structure unfolded. There it was. Every transaction, every login attempt, every administrative change timestamped down to the second, including the one at 5:48 a.m. that morning when Ryan had removed my access and transferred $42,000 into the LLC account. I leaned back in my chair, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house. He thought he had erased me from the system, but the system had been recording him the entire time. For the first time since the error message appeared, I smiled. Not because my marriage was over, but because I had the data, and in my world, data meant leverage. I didn't confront him that morning. Instead, I made coffee, sat back down at the kitchen island, and started building a timeline. The backup logs were meticulous. Every login attempt, every permission change, every transfer carried a timestamp and IP address. At 5:41 a.m., Ryan had logged into our joint banking portal from home. At 5:44, he changed the primary recovery email. At 5:46, he removed my administrative access. At 5:48, he initiated the $42,000 transfer to the LLC account. At 5:52, he deleted the shared financial folder in our cloud drive. At 6:10, he texted me, "You don't need to worry about the finances anymore." It wasn't optimization. It was orchestration. I opened the LLC documentation next. The business registration pulled up easily through the Washington Secretary of State website. The company name sounded generic, something about product innovation and consulting. Ryan was listed as managing member. But when I scrolled further, I saw a second name under initial filing organizer: Alexis Carter. My jaw tightened, but my hand stayed steady on the keyboard. 6 months of transfers flowed from our joint accounts into that LLC. Not random. Structured. Most were under $10. 000. Spaced out every few weeks. Development fees. Market research expenses. Product testing. Except Ryan's company was already funding product testing internally, which meant our marital funds were supplementing something else. My phone buzzed again. "Can we talk tonight?" Ryan wrote. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened our brokerage statements. He had liquidated part of a mutual fund 3 months ago, citing portfolio rebalancing. The funds had never been reallocated. They had gone straight into the LLC. He wasn't just planning to leave. He was building a financial runway. By mid-morning, I had exported every log file, every transaction record, and every system change into a secure folder. I renamed it simply Evidence. At noon, I called a divorce attorney. Her name was Dana Whitmore. I'd referred clients to her before in corporate restructuring cases involving marital asset disputes. She picked up on the third ring. "Donna, it's Lauren Mitchell." "Lauren. Hi, what's going on?" My husband just locked me out of our joint accounts and transferred a significant amount into an LLC co-founded with his subordinate at work. There was a pause. How significant? Just over $100,000 in total across 6 months. 42 this morning. Another pause. Longer this time. "Do you have documentation?" "I have full system logs and transaction history." Her voice shifted into professional focus. "Good. Do not confront him yet. Do not tip him off that you have backups. We need to move quickly before he moves more." I figured. We'll file for an emergency motion to preserve marital assets. And we may be looking at breach of fiduciary duty. Fiduciary duty. The legal term for the obligation spouses have to act in good faith regarding shared finances. Ryan had shattered that. Is this criminal? I asked. Not necessarily, she replied carefully. But concealment and unauthorized transfers can carry serious legal consequences in divorce court, especially if he's structuring funds to hide them. Hide them. That word settled into me like a weight. When I hung up, I stared around the kitchen. The house looked exactly the same as it had yesterday. Same granite countertops, same framed vacation photos on the wall, same neutral paint we had chosen together. Nothing about the space revealed that my marriage was collapsing in spreadsheets and login credentials. At 3, 17 pages. Ryan called. I let it ring. He called again at 3. Untis. Then 3. 23. Then 3. 31. By the time I finally answered at 4. 02. I had rehearsed nothing. I didn't need to. Lauren, he began, exasperated. Why are you ignoring me? I've been working. We need to have a rational conversation about this. About what? The deleted accounts or the new LLC? Silence. Then, you went digging. I didn't have to dig. You left a trail. His tone hardened. This is exactly why I moved things. You always need control. Control. I needed transparency. I corrected. You're overreacting. I was consolidating assets. Streamlining for tax efficiency. With Alexis, another silence. Longer this time. That's separate, he said finally. It wasn't separate. You don't need to make this ugly, he added. We can divide things cleanly. Divide things. As if our shared life were a product feature being sunsetted. Are you filing for divorce? I asked. I was planning to... Yes? Planned. So you were going to empty joint accounts first. I wasn't emptying them, he snapped. I was protecting my future. And there it was. Not ours. His. I ended the call without another word. By early evening, Dana had drafted the emergency filing. We would request immediate freezing of the LLC account pending review. Because my name remained on the original joint accounts. The bank would be obligated to examine the transfers. At 7, 48p. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from Ryan. My card just got declined. Did you do something? I didn't answer. At 7:52, another message. This isn't funny. At 7:55. Lauren. Pick up. I watched the notifications accumulate. 10 missed calls. 15. 20. I didn't feel powerful. I felt clear. At 8. 11p. I received confirmation from the bank. Temporary hold placed on the LLC account pending investigation. At 8. 13. Ryan called again. This time, I answered. What did you do? He demanded. I didn't do anything, I said calmly. The system did. You froze my account. I protected mine. You're blowing this out of proportion. No, I said quietly. You did that when you tried to erase me. There was heavy breathing on the other end. You don't understand what you're risking, he warned. I looked at the screen in front of me, at the neatly organized files labeled evidence. Oh, I replied. I understand exactly what's at stake. And for the first time since that 6. Shara. Error message. I realized something else. He was no longer the one controlling the timeline. Ryan came home just after 10 that night. I heard the garage door hum open. Then the heavy, deliberate footsteps across the hardwood floor. He didn't call out my name like he usually did. He walked straight into the kitchen, where I was still seated with my laptop open and the bank's confirmation email glowing on the screen. What did you tell them? He demanded. I told them nothing that wasn't already documented. His tie was loosened. His face flushed with something between anger and panic. He glanced at the laptop but didn't step closer. You had no right to freeze that account, he said. I had every right. My name funded it. That was business capital. No, I corrected. It was marital assets. He ran a hand through his hair. You're going to ruin everything. Do you understand that? Define everything. He stared at me as if I were suddenly speaking another language. The IPO timeline. My position. The board, he said, lowering his voice. You're escalating this beyond what it needs to be. I didn't escalate it, I replied. You transferred money into a company you share with your subordinate and locked me out of joint accounts. He exhaled sharply. Alexis is not the issue here. Then why is her name on the formation documents? That landed. His eyes flickered. Just slightly. Not enough for someone who didn't know him. Enough for me. You went through the filings, he said slowly. I went through everything. He pulled out a chair across from me and sat down. For the first time since this started, his tone shifted from defensive to strategic. Okay, he said. Let's talk like adults. You and I both know the marriage hasn't been working, he continued. We've grown in different directions. This doesn't have to turn into a war. It turned into a war when you tried to erase me financially. He flinched at the word erase. I wasn't erasing you, he said. I was protecting myself. From what? From you dragging this out. I stared at him, trying to reconcile the man in front of me with the one I had built a life beside. You assumed I would drag it out, I said. You assumed I'd panic. You assumed I wouldn't notice. He didn't deny it. Instead, he leaned forward. Look, I can fix this. I'll move the funds back. We'll structure a clean separation. No court. No filings that could damage my career. And Alexis? I asked. His jaw tightened. That's over. I didn't react. Is it? I asked calmly. He hesitated just long enough to confirm it wasn't. I care about her, he admitted. But this isn't about her. It's about you and me handling this intelligently. Intelligently. You mean quietly? I said. Discreetly, he corrected. The distinction was almost funny. I already filed the emergency motion, I said. His face drained of color. You what? It's done. For asset preservation, he asked, disbelief creeping into his voice. Yes. You had no right. I had every right. He stood up abruptly, pacing now. This is going to trigger compliance reviews, he muttered. Do you have any idea how that looks? A product manager under internal investigation while we're preparing investor roadshows. That sounds like something you should have considered before moving funds into a side entity with a direct report. He stopped pacing. Don't you dare threaten my job. I'm not threatening it, I said. Your own documentation is. For a moment, the room went silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. You've always needed to win, he said finally. This isn't about winning. Then what is it about? It's about not being financially blindsided by my own husband. The word husband felt foreign in my mouth. He leaned against the counter, looking older than he had that morning. I didn't think you'd go this far, he admitted. That sentence cut deeper than any confession. You didn't think I'd protect myself, I corrected. He looked at me like he was seeing a version of me he hadn't accounted for. You've changed, he said. No, I replied quietly. I just stopped trusting. His phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced down at the screen and turned it slightly away from me. A reflex. Is that Alexis? I asked. That's none of your business anymore. It used to be. I closed my laptop slowly. This is what's going to happen, I said. All communication goes through attorneys. The bank investigation proceeds. The LLC stays frozen until reviewed. You're making this public, he said. I'm making it documented. He walked toward the hallway, then stopped. If this destroys my position, he said without turning around, that's on you. No, I said softly. It's on the man who thought deleting data was the same thing as deleting accountability. He didn't respond. A door slammed down the hall. I sat alone at the kitchen island for a long time after that. At 11, 37 pages. A notification appeared in my private cloud storage. New login attempt detected. Ryan had tried to access one of our shared financial tools from a different IP address. He wasn't done. He was still trying to move pieces before the system fully closed in. I opened the log details. 11, 34 pages. Failed login. 11, 35 pages. Failed login. 11, 36 pages. Mouse. Password reset attempt blocked. He was scrambling. And for the first time, I felt something beyond clarity. I felt certainty. This wasn't just about divorce anymore. It was about proving that I could not be erased. And every timestamp was on my side. By morning, the situation had already outgrown our kitchen. At 8, Shirara, Dana called. The bank has escalated the internal review, she said without preamble. They're flagging the transfer pattern as potentially structured to avoid scrutiny. Structured how? I asked. Though I already knew. Incremental amounts below automatic reporting thresholds. It suggests intentional concealment. I closed my eyes briefly. Intentional concealment sounded colder than a fair. More deliberate. They're also asking for clarification regarding the LLC's business activity, she added. Because marital funds were used, they're required to examine whether there was misrepresentation. Will they notify his employer? Not automatically. But if corporate reimbursements or internal data were used to justify transfers, that could change. It already had. I forwarded her the Slack screenshots I'd found in the backup. They were subtle, Ryan discussing external testing budgets and referencing timelines that overlapped with the LLC deposits. At 10:03 a.m., my phone lit up with a LinkedIn notification. Ryan had posted, "Transitions are never easy, but growth often requires difficult decisions. Grateful for the support of those who understand." The comments began within minutes. Colleagues, industry contacts, a few vague mentions of exciting new ventures. I didn't respond. But an hour later, Alexis posted too. "Sometimes love means choosing courage over comfort." The message was accompanied by a filtered photo of a sunset over Lake Washington. My stomach twisted, not from jealousy, but from audacity. At noon, Dana called again. "We need to move quickly," she said. "If he's publicly signaling departure while funds are under review, it suggests he may be attempting narrative control." Narrative control. That matters legally, I asked. It matters strategically. Judges don't like concealment. They especially don't like when one spouse attempts to shift assets while preparing public image management. "I have timestamps," I said. "I know you do." By early afternoon, the bank requested a formal statement from me regarding my knowledge of the LLC. I answered truthfully. I had not consented to the transfers, and I had been denied access to joint accounts without notice. At 2, 17 Mao, Ryan texted. "Did you talk to my company?" "No." Because someone in compliance reached out to me. I didn't respond immediately. A minute later, another message. "This is spiraling." It wasn't spiraling. It was unfolding. At 3:04 p.m., I received a formal email from Ryan's company's legal department requesting clarification regarding any marital dispute that might involve corporate resources. So it had reached them. I forwarded the message to Dana. "Do I respond?" I asked. "Through counsel," she replied. And carefully. By late afternoon, the house felt less like a home and more like a waiting room. Ryan didn't return calls. He didn't come home that night. Instead, he sent a single message. "We need to settle this quietly. For both our sakes." Quietly. I looked at the evidence folder on my laptop. Structured transfers. Deleted permissions. Coordinated timelines with Alexis. Nothing about this had been quiet. At 6:42 pages. Another alert appeared in my backup system. New administrative change detected. He had attempted to modify ownership percentages within the LLC. I stared at the log entry. 6:38 pages. Me. Ownership adjustment initiated. 6:39 pages. Secondary authorization request triggered. 40 pages. Change pending. He was trying to dilute his visible share, which meant he knew the investigation was serious. I called Dana immediately. He's altering the LLC structure. I said, "That strengthens our position." She replied calmly. "It demonstrates reactive restructuring under scrutiny. Can we stop it? We can request an injunction. I'll draft it tonight." By 8. 15 pages. Me. My phone showed 27 missed calls from Ryan. I finally answered on the 28th. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "Documenting. You're forcing this into a corporate investigation. You forced it there when you used company language to justify personal transfers." He exhaled sharply. "You're destroying everything we built. We built it together." I said, "And you tried to reassign my contribution." There was silence. "You think you're smarter than everyone," he muttered. "No," I said quietly. "I think I pay attention." A long pause stretched between us. "You could have just trusted me," he said. "I did," I replied. "That's why this works." He didn't understand. Trust had allowed me access long enough to establish documentation habits. Trust had built shared accounts. Trust had given me the visibility I needed. And when he revoked it, the system kept recording. "You're going to regret this," he warned. "I already regret not seeing it sooner." He hung up. At 9:02 p.m., another notification appeared. "Temporary administrative lock placed on LLC pending review. The ownership modification failed." I leaned back in my chair. The house quiet around me. This was no longer just about betrayal. It was about breach of fiduciary duty. About financial manipulation. About the legal consequences of assuming your spouse won't check the numbers. Outside, rain began to fall against the windows. Inside, every file sat in perfect order. Ryan thought he was managing optics. I was managing evidence. And the difference between those two things was about to define everything. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. I wore navy, not because I wanted to look intimidating, but because I wanted to look steady, neutral, controlled. I tied my hair back, chose minimal jewelry, and printed 3 hard copies of every document Dana had prepared. Evidence had weight in my hands. It made the situation feel less surreal. King County Family Court was quieter than I expected. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, muted conversations in the hallway. High-stakes divorce didn't look dramatic from the outside. It looked procedural. Ryan arrived 10 minutes before the hearing, flanked by 2 attorneys. One I recognized as a divorce specialist. The other I didn't, sharp suit. Corporate demeanor. That alone told me everything. He wasn't treating this as a marriage ending. He was treating it as a risk assessment. His eyes flickered toward me briefly. No nod. No acknowledgement. We entered the courtroom. Dana spoke first. She laid out the timeline clearly. Unauthorized removal of account access. Structured transfers of marital funds into an LLC co-founded with a subordinate. Attempted modification of ownership percentages after review was initiated. No emotion. Just facts. Ryan's attorney countered by calling it a strategic financial restructuring misinterpreted during marital breakdown. He emphasized that the funds were intended for legitimate business development. Dana introduced the system logs. Login timestamps. IP addresses. Administrative changes minutes before my access was revoked. The 6:10 May. Text message. You don't need to worry about the finances anymore. The judge read it twice. Mr. Mitchell, she said, looking directly at Ryan. Why were joint funds transferred without documented spousal consent? Ryan cleared his throat. It was temporary allocation, he said. I intended to inform her once the structure was finalized. After removing her access, silence. Dana then presented the attempted ownership dilution within the LLC, initiated after the bank freeze. The judge's expression shifted. That suggests reactive concealment, she said calmly. Ryan's corporate attorney leaned forward. Your Honor, there was no intent to conceal. My client was navigating a complex personal and professional transition. The judge didn't look impressed. "I am issuing a temporary asset preservation order," she said. "No further transfers. No structural changes to the LLC. All financial records to be disclosed within 7 days." The gavel struck lightly. It wasn't dramatic. It was decisive. Outside the courtroom, Ryan caught up to me before I reached the elevator. "You're enjoying this," he said under his breath. "I'm protecting myself." "You've made this public?" "No," I corrected. "You did that when you involved company structures." His jaw tightened. "My board is aware now." "That sounds like a consequence." "Not an attack." He stepped closer. "You think corporate ethics committees care about your feelings? I think they care about compliance." The elevator doors opened. He didn't follow me inside. By the time I reached the parking garage, my phone buzzed. "Dana, corporate counsel has reached out," she said. "They've requested documentation related to the LLC overlap with internal project timelines." "They're escalating," I said. Yes, that word carried weight. By mid-afternoon, Ryan's LinkedIn post had been quietly edited. The phrase "new venture" disappeared. Comments were limited. At 4, 37 pages. I received an email from corporate legal requesting an interview. They were evaluating potential conflicts of interest and misuse of development resources. I forwarded it to Dana. "Should I cooperate?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "With counsel present. Full transparency strengthens your position." At 6, 12 pages. Ryan showed up at the house. He looked different. Less composed. Less controlled. "You talked to them," he said. "They contacted me. You could have declined." "Why would I?" "Because this doesn't have to destroy my career." "I didn't destroy it." "You triggered it," he insisted. I studied him carefully. "You're blaming me for the investigation." "I'm blaming you for escalating. You moved 6 figures into a side entity with a direct report. That wasn't illegal. It wasn't ethical either." He ran a hand over his face. "You don't understand how this works," he said. "The optics alone could cost me everything. You should have considered that before structuring transfers." He paced the kitchen, just like the night before. "This is about pride," he said. "You can't stand losing control. It's about fiduciary duty." He laughed. But it sounded brittle. "We're talking about a marriage, Lauren, not a board meeting. You blurred that line." The room fell silent again. For a moment, I saw something like fear flicker across his face. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "Full disclosure." "That's it. That's everything." He stared at me as if trying to calculate whether honesty would cost him more than concealment. "I never meant to hurt you," he said finally. "You meant to protect yourself," I replied. There was no denial. His phone buzzed. He glanced down and went pale. "What?" I asked. "Board counsel wants a meeting tomorrow morning." The words hung between us. "You should go," I said. He looked at me differently then. Not angry. Not defensive. Just uncertain. As if he was beginning to understand that this wasn't something he could manage with messaging. After he left, I opened my laptop again. A new notification waited in my backup system. Corporate domain access attempted to retrieve archived financial emails. They were digging. This had expanded beyond divorce, beyond betrayal, beyond family drama. It was now a question of corporate ethics, financial manipulation, and legal consequences layered on top of a marriage that no longer existed. I closed the laptop slowly. He thought freezing a credit card was the worst that could happen. He hadn't considered what happens when institutions start asking questions. And institutions don't get tired. They don't get emotional. They follow the trail. The call from corporate legal came at 9:03 a.m. The next morning, I was already seated at my dining table with Dana on speaker and a fresh legal pad in front of me. "M.S. Mitchell," the woman on the line said, voice clipped and professional. "We are conducting an internal compliance review regarding Mr. Ryan Mitchell's involvement in an external LLC that may intersect with company resources. We understand marital funds were involved. Yes, I said evenly. Without my authorization. There was a pause while she typed. We are not seeking personal marital details, she continued. We are assessing potential conflicts of interest, misallocation of company time, and misuse of internal data. I understand. Dana stepped in smoothly. My client is prepared to provide documentation strictly limited to financial overlap and time-stamped activity. Please forward relevant materials. Corporate counsel replied, we are particularly interested in transfer dates corresponding to internal product development cycles. When the call ended, Dana muted herself for a moment. This just shifted, she said. They're no longer treating it as rumor. They're tracing financial flow against company milestones. He told them I escalated it, I said quietly. He escalated it when he involved corporate assets. I opened the evidence folder again and filtered by date. Every transfer coincided with a product sprint. Internal Slack messages mentioned prototype testing expenses days before funds left our joint account. If those expenses were double billed, once internally, once through the LLC, it wouldn't just be a marital dispute. It would be financial fraud. At 11:22 a.m., Ryan called. I answered. What did you send them? He demanded. Documents. You're making it look criminal. I'm making it look documented. He exhaled sharply. They're treating me like I embezzled something. Did you? No. The answer came too fast. I leveraged resources creatively. He corrected himself. That's not what they're going to call it. He lowered his voice. If they classify this as misuse, I lose equity. Do you understand that? Yes. Equity that would have been part of our asset division. You already attempted to redirect assets. That was different. It wasn't. Silence. They've scheduled a board review, he said finally. When? Tomorrow. His tone carried something new. Fear. After the call ended, I sat still for several minutes. High-stakes divorce had morphed into something larger. Not just asset division. Not just hidden assets. Corporate governance. Institutional review. At 2:07 p.m., I received another notification. Forensic accountant preliminary findings available. I opened the PDF slowly. The report outlined patterns. Incremental transfers below automatic reporting thresholds. Overlap between LLC expenditures and internal corporate reimbursements. Timing adjustments after marital dispute became apparent. The phrase pattern of concealment behavior appeared twice. I forwarded it to Dana. Her reply was immediate. This strengthens your breach of fiduciary duty claim. It also increases pressure on his board. At 5:18 pages. And Ryan showed up again. He looked exhausted. They're reviewing my Slack history, he said without greeting. I figured, you don't understand how fast this spreads internally. I understand audits. He paced the living room. If this gets labeled financial manipulation, I'm done. Done how? Termination for cause. Equity forfeiture. Reputation damage. The words sounded heavier when he said them out loud. You structured transfers to avoid detection, I said quietly. I was protecting liquidity. You were protecting yourself. He stopped pacing. I thought you'd fight emotionally, he said. Cry. Threaten. Not this, I asked. Documentation. Injunctions. Compliance triggers. I consult for a living. I said, you forgot that. He stared at me. You're destroying 3 lives, he said. 3. Mina. Alexis's. Yours. I'm protecting mine. He looked away. They're interviewing Alexis tomorrow. The information landed with unexpected force. She was listed as co-founder. I said, of course they are. She didn't know the transfer details. She signed formation paperwork. She trusted me. The irony was sharp. So did I replied. He ran his hands over his face again. If I lose my job, we both lose, he said. No, I corrected. You lose the position you built while excluding me. That's cold. It's accurate. At 8, 46 pages. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. Lauren, a female voice asked. Yes. It's Alexis. I didn't speak. I didn't know about the structure, she said quickly. Ryan told me it was standard equity planning. You're listed as organizer, I said. I signed what he sent. That's not how liability works. Silence. They're asking me about reimbursements, she whispered. I don't want this on my record. Then tell them the truth. The line went quiet for a long moment. Did you freeze the account? She asked. The system did. She hung up. At 9:03 p.m., another alert appeared in my backup system. Corporate domain accessed archived email threads referencing external development alignment. They were tracing language. Tracing intent? I closed my laptop slowly. Ryan thought this was a marital conflict. It wasn't anymore. It was an institutional investigation layered over betrayal. And institutions don't respond to apologies. They respond to patterns. Tomorrow, the board would meet. And whatever narrative Ryan had prepared would be weighed against timestamps. He had tried to delete me quietly. Now entire departments were restoring what he thought was gone. I didn't attend the board session, but I felt it unfold in real time. At 9. Shara. Ryan texted. They're asking about the Slack threads. At 9. Shaba. They want clarification on the reimbursement overlap. At 9:27. Did you send them everything? I didn't answer. Dana had advised silence unless necessary. Let institutions do what institutions do best, ask questions. By 10:04 another notification appeared in my secure cloud. Corporate legal had formally requested copies of transfer logs directly from the bank. That meant the review was no longer theoretical. They were cross-verifying. At 11:36 Ryan called. I let it ring. He left a voicemail. They're treating this like I manipulated development budgets, he said. Voice tight. This isn't what it looks like. I listened once. Then archived it. At 12, 14 pages. Dana called. The board has escalated to formal compliance investigation, she said. They're reviewing whether there was misuse of company time, data, or funds. Termination, I asked. Possible, especially if they find structured concealment. Concealment. The word echoed differently now. Less personal. More institutional. At 1:03 p.m. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from corporate counsel. Ms. Mitchell, we appreciate your cooperation. Additional questions may arise as we continue our internal review. They were documenting me as cooperative. Not emotional. Not retaliatory. Just factual. At 2:48 p.m. Ryan showed up at the house without warning. He didn't knock. He walked in like he still belonged there. They're pulling my access, he said immediately. To what? Internal dashboards. Repository permissions. I'm locked out. I held his gaze. Like I was... He flinched. This is different. It's identical. They're calling it precautionary. So was the bank. He paced the kitchen, hands restless. They're implying conflict of interest with Alexis, he said. That I leveraged internal product forecasts to justify LLC positioning. Did you? It wasn't leverage. It was alignment. Without disclosure. He slammed his palm lightly against the counter. I didn't think it would blow up like this. You thought I'd accept the narrative. He stopped pacing. I thought you'd want a quiet settlement. You miscalculated. He stared at me for a long moment. I could lose everything, he said quietly. You structured everything to exclude me. That's not the same. It is when you're married. Silence settled between us. My equity vesting review is tomorrow, he added. There it was. The real fear, equity, Not apology? Not reconciliation. Financial position. They can claw it back, I asked. If they classify this as misconduct. And if they do, he didn't answer. Instead, his phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen and went pale. What? I asked. They've scheduled interviews with my direct reports. That meant Alexis. And others. Institutional investigations don't stop at one person. They map networks. He looked suddenly smaller in the space. This wasn't supposed to reach this level, he muttered. You reached this level, I said calmly. He looked at me as if trying to reconcile the woman he married with the one standing in front of him. You're enjoying watching this happen, he said. No, I replied honestly. I'm watching consequences unfold. He laughed once. Hollow. Corporate ethics committees don't care about context. Neither do system logs. He sank into a chair. What do you want from me? He asked. Full disclosure. You already have everything. Not everything, I said. Intent. He looked away. You think this makes you powerful? He asked after a moment. No, I said. Preparation makes me stable. He stood abruptly. If I lose my job, you'll feel it too. I've already planned for that. His eyes snapped back to mine. You planned for my termination. I planned for instability. That landed harder than anything else. At 6. 22 pages. My phone buzzed again. Donna. They've suspended him pending review, she said. Officially. Yes. Paid administrative leave while investigation concludes. I closed my eyes briefly. This wasn't victory. It was inevitability. When I opened them, Ryan was still standing there. What now? He asked quietly. Now? I said. Institutions finish what they started. He shook his head. You didn't have to push it this far. I didn't push, I replied. I preserved. He left without another word. At 8:03 p. Another alert appeared in my backup system. No new login attempts. No administrative changes. Just stillness. For the first time in days. There was no scrambling on the other side. I sat at the kitchen island. The house quiet around me. High-stakes divorce had become corporate investigation. Family betrayal had become formal review. Hidden assets had become forensic evidence. He thought freezing my access was power. But power isn't deleting data. Power is knowing it was never truly gone. And tonight, the system was still, which meant tomorrow would bring something final. The official notice arrived at 7:42 upon Ryan Mitchell. Termination for cause. I stared at the forwarded email Dana had sent me, reading the phrase twice before it fully settled. Termination for cause meant no severance cushion, no quiet exit package, no protected equity vesting. It meant misconduct had been substantiated. My phone vibrated almost immediately. Did you see it? Ryan texted. I didn't respond. 3 minutes later, he called. I answered. They fired me, he said flatly. I assumed they might. You assumed. They conducted an investigation. You triggered it. I documented it. There was a pause on the other end. They're clawing back my unvested equity, he continued, and reviewing bonus distributions tied to last quarter. The word clawing sounded violent, almost animalistic. That's standard for termination for cause, I said. You sound like you're reading from a handbook. I consult for companies in crisis. This is my life. Lauren. You structured it. He exhaled sharply. They're saying I failed to disclose an external entity with overlapping development timelines. They're saying I used internal projections to justify LLC positioning. Did you? It wasn't misuse, he insisted. It was optimization. The same word he'd used when he locked me out of our accounts. Optimization. At 9:15 a.m. Another email arrived from corporate counsel confirming his access credentials had been permanently revoked. They thanked me for my cooperation. The formality of it all felt almost surreal. 12 years of marriage reduced to documentation and compliance language. By late morning, industry whispers had begun. A tech blog posted a short piece about leadership instability at Ryan's former company. No names, but timing was obvious. At 11:22 m, Alexis texted me. He told me you'd ruin everything. I didn't answer. A second message followed. I didn't know he structured transfers like that. I replied once. You signed the formation paperwork. Silence after that. At 1:03 p.m., Ryan showed up at the house again. This time he didn't storm in. He stood at the doorway like a guest. They froze my corporate card, he said quietly. They revoked my badge access. Security escorted me out. I studied him. The confidence was gone. So it's official. I said, official, he echoed. He walked into the living room and sat down slowly. Like the furniture might reject him too. They're reviewing tax classifications on the LLC, he added. If they escalate that to regulators, that's not in my control. You sent the logs. I sent documentation to my attorney. They shared it. They responded to an inquiry. He looked up at me then, eyes tired. Alexis resigned, he said. I didn't react. She didn't want her name attached to compliance reviews. She attached it when she signed. He let out a short, humorless laugh. She thought we were building something. You were, I said. Just not what you told her. Silence settled between us. What happens now? He asked finally. Now we proceed with divorce. That's it, he asked. After all this, what else is there? He leaned forward, elbows on knees. I could have fixed this quietly, he said. Moved the funds back. Dissolved the LLC. No one would have known. I would have known. That's pride. No, I said. That's survival. He stared at the floor. They're calling it financial manipulation, he muttered. Like I engineered something malicious. You structured transfers below reporting thresholds, I said evenly. You removed my access minutes before a large transfer. You attempted to alter ownership percentages after investigation began. You memorized the timestamps? I archived them. His shoulders sagged. I didn't think you'd go this far. He admitted again. You didn't think I'd prepare. He looked at me then with something close to regret. I never meant to hurt you, he said softly. I believe that, I replied. He seemed surprised. But you meant to protect yourself, I continued. Even if that meant erasing me. He didn't argue. At 47 pages. My phone buzzed again. Dana. They've referred certain LLC records for tax review, she said. It may not escalate. But it's possible. So this isn't over, I said. It's stabilizing, she replied. From our standpoint, your position is strong. Asset preservation order stands. Termination strengthens breach of fiduciary duty claim. I ended the call and looked at Ryan. They're reviewing tax filings. I told him. His face drained again. This is spiraling, he whispered. No, I said quietly. This is consequence. He stood slowly. I thought freezing your access was leverage, he said. It was exposure. He nodded once, as if finally understanding the distinction. I need to talk to a tax attorney, he muttered. Yes, I said. You do. He walked toward the door. For a moment, I almost felt something like pity. But pity doesn't undo structured concealment. Pity doesn't restore deleted permissions. Pity doesn't replace trust. When the door closed behind him, the house felt lighter, not peaceful, just clearer. By evening, the notifications had slowed. No new login attempts, no administrative changes, no frantic messages. The system was quiet. I opened my dashboard one more time and watched the green status icon beside the LLC account. Frozen. He had tried to build a future that excluded me. Now his present was under review. And for the first time since that 6 error message. I felt something steady settle in my chest. Not revenge. Control. The final hearing was quieter than the emergency one. There were no raised voices. No frantic phone vibrations. Just paperwork. Timelines. And the weight of decisions that had already been set in motion. Ryan sat across from me at the long table in King County Family Court. No longer flanked by corporate counsel. Just his divorce attorney and a stack of documents that looked thinner than before. He looked different. Less sharp. Less certain. The judge reviewed the file carefully. Mr. Mitchell, she began. This court has examined the documented transfer patterns, the removal of spousal access, and the attempted modification of LLC ownership following financial review. Ryan's attorney tried again to frame it as restructuring. As part of anticipated marital dissolution, my client sought to protect liquidity for future planning. The judge didn't look impressed. Protection does not include concealment, she said evenly. Spouses have a fiduciary duty to one another. The word fiduciary hung in the air like a verdict before the verdict. Dana stood and presented the forensic accountant's summary. Structured transfers. Below threshold increments. Alignment with internal product cycles. Post-dispute ownership changes. None of it was emotional. It didn't need to be. The documentation spoke in timestamps. The judge folded her hands. This court finds that Mr. Mitchell breached his fiduciary duty by intentionally restricting access to joint financial accounts and transferring marital assets without informed consent. Ryan's shoulders stiffened. Accordingly, she continued, temporary asset preservation remains in effect until final division is executed. Funds transferred to the LLC are to be returned to the marital estate. Legal fees incurred due to concealment will be reimbursed. The words landed with calm authority. It wasn't dramatic. It was structural. Ryan didn't look at me. He stared straight ahead as if focusing on a distant point might reverse the outcome. Additionally, the judge added, the attempted ownership modification after review initiation suggests reactive concealment behavior. This court takes that seriously. Reactive concealment. There it was again. The hearing concluded without spectacle. Outside the courtroom. Reporters weren't waiting. There were no cameras. No shouting. Just a hallway that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old carpet. Ryan stopped walking halfway to the elevator. So this is it, he said quietly. This is the legal part, I replied. He laughed once under his breath. You've turned a divorce into a case study. You turned a marriage into a risk assessment. He rubbed his forehead. They're auditing the LLC tax filings, he said. I had to hire a specialist. That's wise. You're not even angry anymore. No, I said truthfully. I'm finished. The words seemed to hit him harder than any accusation. I lost my job, he said. My equity. Alexis left. And now half of what's left goes back to the marital estate. You structured it that way. You don't feel anything. I paused. I feel relief. He looked at me as if searching for cruelty and finding none. I thought you'd be vindictive, he admitted. I was prepared. He shook his head slowly. You could have agreed to a quiet settlement. You could have left the accounts alone. Silence stretched between us. Was it worth it? He asked finally. I considered the question carefully. Yes, I said. Not because he lost his job. Not because Alexis resigned. Not because the board revoked his access. But because I was no longer scrambling to restore access to my own life. He exhaled slowly. I underestimated you, he said. I know. We walked in separate directions after that. That evening, I opened my laptop at the same kitchen island where everything had started. The evidence folder still sat in my private cloud storage. Neatly organized. The bank confirmed transfer reversals were scheduled. The LLC remained frozen pending tax review. The divorce decree would be finalized within weeks. Every system now reflected transparency. No missing access. No altered permissions. No surprise notifications. I scrolled through the timeline once more. 5:41 a.m. Login attempt. 5:44 a.m. Ma, Recovery email change. 5. 46 about. Mem. Access removed. 5. 40 hora. $42. 000 transfer. 6. 10 a.m. You don't need to worry about the finances anymore. It had felt like the beginning of collapse. Instead, it had been the beginning of restoration. My phone buzzed softly. A message from Dana. Court order entered. Asset return confirmed. I typed back a simple thank you. Outside, Seattle rain tapped lightly against the windows. Inside, the house felt different. Not because it was empty, but because it was no longer unstable. Ryan had believed control meant restricting access. He had believed financial manipulation would give him leverage. He had believed I would react emotionally and negotiate quietly. Instead, documentation had replaced drama. Institutions had replaced arguments. Legal consequences had replaced assumptions. I closed the laptop slowly. The legal battle was over. But something else was just beginning. For the first time in months, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing, and that felt more powerful than anything he had tried to delete. The house felt too large after the court order became final. Not empty, just quiet in a way that echoed. Ryan had moved the rest of his belongings out 2 days earlier. The closet space looked unfamiliar without his suits. The office shelf where his industry awards had stood was bare, except for a faint outline in the dust. Asset division paperwork arrived in a thick envelope that afternoon. Dana had tabbed everything. Marital funds restored to the estate. Legal fees reimbursed. Structured repayment schedule in place. Equity forfeiture noted as personal consequence. Not shared asset. There was no celebration in reading it. Just confirmation. By late morning, I received notice from the bank that the final transfer reversal had cleared. The funds sat back in the joint account. Temporarily. Until distribution would be executed. The number on the screen didn't make me smile. It made me breathe easier. Ryan texted around noon. They're still reviewing tax classifications. I didn't answer immediately. A second message followed. They may reclassify some of the LLC expenses as personal gain. I typed one sentence. Speak to your attorney. He didn't respond after that. By early afternoon, industry chatter had intensified. A recruiter I'd worked with before messaged me privately. Sorry to hear about Ryan. Rough situation. Rough. That was the word people used when they wanted distance from detail. I closed the message without replying. At 3. 是企业. Ryan called. I answered. They reduced my severance, he said flatly. Because of termination for cause. Yes. There was a long pause. I have to liquidate some personal investments to meet the repayment schedule. That's your responsibility. I know. His voice sounded thinner now, stripped of the confidence it used to carry so easily. They're auditing my expense reports for the last 2 quarters, he added, looking for overlap. Then provide documentation. He laughed once. You really think everything is solvable with documentation? No, I said, but accountability usually starts there. He didn't argue. I didn't expect it to spiral like this, he admitted. It didn't spiral, I said quietly. It unfolded. After the call ended, I walked through the house slowly. The framed wedding photo still sat on the hallway console. I picked it up and studied it. We looked younger, less guarded. I set it back down, not out of sentiment, but because removing it felt like too much energy. Instead, I opened the real estate listing draft my agent had emailed earlier that week. 3-bedroom home in quiet Bellevue neighborhood. Strong equity position. Recently updated kitchen. Strong equity position. That phrase stood out. Equity wasn't just financial. It was what you built through time. Through shared effort. Through contribution. Ryan had tried to reposition it without me. The system had restored it. I called the agent. Let's list it, I said. Are you sure? She asked gently. It's a good market. I'm sure. By evening, the for sale sign was digitally scheduled. Not yet in the yard, but coming. At 6, 42 pages. Another email arrived from Dana. IRS inquiry limited to LLC entity. You are fully detached from exposure. I read it twice. Fully detached. The legal separation was no longer just emotional or marital. It was structural. My phone buzzed again. A different number this time. I almost ignored it. But something made me answer. Lauren. It was Ryan's mother. Yes. I'm calling because this has gone far enough, she said carefully. Ryan has suffered enough. I didn't respond immediately. You've made your point, she continued. Do you really need to enforce every detail? I'm not enforcing revenge, I said calmly. I'm enforcing boundaries. He's lost his job. He structured transfers. He's humiliated. He concealed assets. Silence. You were part of our family, she said finally. I agreed. The line went quiet. After we hung up, I sat on the couch and let the quiet settle again. Family drama had its own gravity. People wanted a villain and a victim. They didn't want spreadsheets. They didn't want fiduciary duty. They didn't want documentation. They wanted a story where someone softened. But softening would mean ignoring the pattern. At 8:03 p.m., my phone lit up one more time. A text from Ryan. Was it worth it? I stared at the message for a long moment. Was it worth it? The compliance review. The termination. The asset division. The public whispers. I thought about that 6. Login error. About the blank dashboard. About the moment I realized my access had been revoked without warning. I typed slowly. Yes. Then I deleted it. I didn't owe him an answer. Instead, I set my phone down and opened my laptop. I began restructuring my consulting services page. New offering. Divorce financial preparedness. Digital asset safeguarding. Documentation systems for shared accounts. If this experience had taught me anything, it was this. Most people don't lose control because they lack intelligence. They lose control because they assume trust replaces oversight. I didn't need him to admit fault. I didn't need public vindication. I needed structural stability. And for the first time in months, everything in my life felt aligned with that goal. The for sale listing went live at 9. 27 pages. The house would move. So would I? Not because he left, but because I refused to stay where someone had tried to erase me. The first showing was scheduled for Saturday at 10 a.m. I woke early and walked through the house one last time before strangers stepped inside to evaluate it in square footage and resale value. The walls were freshly painted in neutral tones. The photos were gone. Even the indentation in the carpet where our couch used to sit had softened. It looked like a property now, not a life. The realtor moved efficiently, adjusting throw pillows, opening blinds to let Seattle light filter in. Strong equity position, she said again, almost as reassurance. I nodded. Equity had once meant shared growth. Now it meant clean division. By noon, we had 2 offers. I didn't feel nostalgic. I felt decisive. That afternoon, I signed the preliminary acceptance paperwork. Closing would happen within 30 days. Ryan texted once when he saw the listing online. You're selling? Yes. We could have kept it. No, I replied. There was no argument after that. 3 days later, he asked to meet in person to close things respectfully. I agreed to a public cafe near downtown Bellevue. He arrived early. No suit this time. No polished confidence. Just a man in a plain jacket with a phone he kept flipping over on the table as if waiting for it to light up. You look fine, he said awkwardly when I sat down. So do you? Small talk hovered between us and then fell away. I got an offer for a contract position, he said finally. Short term. Lower pay. That's good, I said. He studied me. You're different. I'm clearer. He nodded slowly. I didn't think you'd rebuild this fast. I didn't collapse, I said. There it was again, miscalculation. He had expected emotional fallout, instability, negotiation. Instead, He got documentation and exit strategy. I wanted to say, he began, then stopped. I'm sorry for the way I handled it. The apology felt partial, careful, measured. I appreciate that, I said. You loved me once. Yes. And now I love stability more. He absorbed that without defensiveness. I thought I was being smart, he admitted. Moving things early. Creating space. You created exposure. I know that now. We sat in silence for a few seconds. I didn't mean to treat you like an obstacle, he added quietly. But you did, he nodded. When we stood to leave, there was no dramatic goodbye. Just acknowledgement. That chapter had closed. 2 weeks later, I moved into a downtown Seattle condo overlooking Elliott Bay. Smaller, modern, bright. Everything inside it was mine. I set up my home office first. New desk, dual monitors, updated encryption software, 2-factor authentication on every account, automated encrypted backups across financial platforms. Not out of fear, out of discipline. By the end of the month, my consulting website had launched a new service line. Digital Asset Safeguard Program, Divorce Financial Readiness Toolkit, Marital Transparency Audits. The first seminar filled within days. Women in their 40s and 50s. Some suspicious, some already separated, some just uneasy about subtle changes in shared accounts. I didn't tell them my story in detail. I didn't need to. I showed them how to set automatic backups, how to monitor administrative permission changes, how to understand fiduciary duty within marriage. One woman stayed after the seminar ended. I found discrepancies last night, she said quietly. Because of what you showed us. I nodded. Documentation doesn't create betrayal. It reveals it. A week later, a handwritten note arrived in the mail. Thank you for teaching me not to ignore red flags. I placed it on my desk beside my laptop. News about Ryan filtered through mutual acquaintances occasionally. He'd moved into a rental in Portland. The tax inquiry had resolved with penalties but no criminal charges. His contract work was steady but not glamorous. Alexis had relocated out of state. I didn't follow closely. Consequences no longer required my attention. One evening, as I finished updating a client dashboard, my phone buzzed with a final email from Ryan. No subject line. I hope you're doing well. That was it. No justification. No revisionist narrative. No strategic phrasing. Just a sentence. I read it once and archived it. No reply. No need. The condo windows reflected the city lights as night settled in. Boats moved quietly across the dark water. My laptop displayed a clean financial dashboard, categorized accounts, diversified investments, automatic savings transfers, no missing permissions, no altered recovery emails, no surprise notifications. I leaned back in my chair. What had hurt most wasn't the affair. It wasn't even the structured transfers. It was the assumption that I wouldn't look, that I would prioritize comfort over clarity, that I would accept opacity because it preserved peace. Peace without transparency isn't peace. It's exposure. I opened my cloud storage and watched the automated backup notification appear in the corner of the screen. Backup complete. A small green check mark. No drama. Just confirmation. I wasn't rebuilding from ruin. I was rebuilding from awareness. And that made all the difference. The first time I walked into my new condo alone at night, I didn't turn on the television. I opened the windows instead. The city below hummed in low, steady rhythms, cars gliding across wet streets, distant ferry horns, the faint pulse of a place that never completely sleeps. The air smelled like rain and salt from the bay. It felt clean, for the first time in a long time. So did my life. The house in Bellevue had officially closed 2 weeks earlier. The wire transfer hit my account at 9:14. I watched the confirmation screen without emotion. Not because it didn't matter, but because I had already detached from what it represented. That house had once been a symbol of partnership. Now it was capital. Capital I redirected into diversified investments, a larger emergency reserve, and a strategic expansion of my consulting firm. No impulsive purchases. No symbolic splurges. Just structure. Structure had saved me. I sat at my desk and opened my financial dashboard. Every account categorized. Every asset visible. Every access permission verified. Two-factor authentication active across platforms. Cloud backups synchronized automatically in 3 separate encrypted environments. Transparent. Controlled. Documented. The irony wasn't lost on me. The thing Ryan thought he could manipulate, data, had become the very instrument that exposed him. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned. A week after moving in, I hosted my first in-person workshop under the new brand umbrella. Digital Financial Defense for Women. 30 seats. 30 filled. Some women were in their 30s. Some in their 60s. A few had already filed for divorce. Others simply felt something was off. Subtle password changes. New optimization strategies. Unfamiliar financial jargon from men who suddenly wanted more control. I didn't preach distrust. I taught awareness. Transparency is not suspicion. I told them. It's protection. I walked them through administrative access logs, backup systems, and fiduciary responsibility within marriage. I showed them how to set automated financial alerts and how to understand LLC formations tied to shared funds. No one laughed. No one rolled their eyes. They took notes. After the session ended, a woman in her mid-50s approached me quietly. "I found a second credit line last month," she said. "He said it was business-related." "And now?" I asked gently. I checked the backup history like you suggested. It wasn't business. She didn't cry. She stood straighter. That was the difference. Pain doesn't disappear, but knowledge changes posture. Ryan's name surfaced occasionally through mutual contacts. Contract roles. Consulting gigs. A smaller apartment. No major legal escalation beyond financial penalties and company termination. He never tried to rebuild anything with me. He sent one last email 3 months ago. I didn't understand what I was risking. That was the most honest thing he had ever written. He hadn't understood the risk of underestimating me, or the risk of digital permanence in a world built on records, or the risk of believing that deleting something meant erasing it. Alexis disappeared from my radar entirely. I learned she relocated to another state after the tax investigation on the LLC closed. I didn't ask for details. Some stories don't need sequels. One evening, I found myself scrolling through old archived photos. Vacations. Anniversaries. Smiles that had once felt solid. I didn't feel bitterness. I felt clarity. Ryan wasn't a villain in a dramatic movie. He was a man who made calculated choices under the assumption that I wouldn't calculate back. That assumption cost him more than the money ever did. 6 months after the divorce finalized, my business doubled its revenue. Not because I capitalized on betrayal. Because I understood systems. Because I had lived the consequences of ignoring small red flags. Because I refused to let humiliation define the narrative. The night my automated backup notification pinged again. Backup complete, I smiled. Not because I feared losing something, but because I knew I wouldn't. Control doesn't mean domination. It means awareness. It means participation in your own financial life. It means never outsourcing your security to someone else's explanation. I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window, looking out over the city lights reflecting on dark water. Once, I had believed marriage alone created stability. Now I understood something deeper. Stability is built. It's audited. It's documented. It's protected. And sometimes, it's rebuilt alone. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Love is not an excuse to surrender visibility. Partnership is not the same as blind trust. And in a digital world, the truth almost always leaves a trail. Don't wait until something disappears to ask questions. Set your backups. Know your accounts. Read what you sign. And if someone ever tells you, "Don't worry, I've handled it," make sure you can verify exactly what that means. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt that subtle shift in control, that quiet tightening around your own finances, stay here. Subscribe to this channel. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what red flags you wish you hadn't ignored. Because the more we talk about financial transparency, hidden power, and smart revenge rooted in strategy, not chaos, the stronger we all become. And remember, in a world where people think they can press delete on accountability, the smartest move you can make is to make sure the backup is already running. This story is fictionalized for dramatic effect.